This is the Power of OZmosis Podcast, powered by the vidwheel Creator Network. Hi, everyone. This is the Power of OZmosis video podcast, powered by vidwheel Creator Network. My name is John Osberg, and I am the founder of Power of OZmosis Consulting. Really excited to be joined today by a former college professor of mine, mentor of mine while in college, and now friend here in the business world, Dr. Michael Barnwell of Philosophy for Business. Dr. Barnwell, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John. You said I was a mentor of yours, but you've become a mentor of mine most recently. So I thank you for that. And I got to say, before we start, you really live up to your motto of serving others, helping others, connecting others. I feel like that's all you've done since we sort of reconnected in the last couple months, is you've gone out of your way to serve me and connect me without asking anything in return. So I'm very impressed by how you have this motto and you live by it. You walk the talk.
I'm humbled and energized by that, Doc. And I'd like to give you some credit for my time at Niagara and the honors program, the ethics honors class that I took, which, I really enjoyed it. I kind of reflect on, and I know I did it at a recent speaking event that you connected me into at Trek with the Niagara University Honors Department, in that, your famous, maybe, I don't know if it's a soliloquy or whatever, monologue in front of our ethics honors class where, you talked about life being messy. And at that time we're in college and life still was a lot of theory. And then you get out and you start to realize really what life involves and how it's chaos at times. And that's why I was so intrigued by, your monologue. So that said, though, Philosophy for Business, that's how we reconnected. It's pretty cool to see all these years later. This was over probably about a decade ago, right? We've talked about it now a couple times in some of those connections you just referred to. So I'm excited to be talking to you so that we can breathe life, or not even breathe life, but give color to what is Philosophy for Business, so that folks that are interested in learning more and connecting with you, and I know I'm already connecting you into places because I see the value here of how we can take philosophy and apply that to business and helping the business to make decisions, helping the business to grow, to actualize its mission. So I'm excited to learn more. So maybe just a quick intro, Dr. Barnwell, on who you are, how you've gotten to here now, and then we'll start to dig into, your philosophical kind of business consulting endeavor.
Yeah, great. Thanks. So I'm a philosophy professor. I actually have a dual PhD from Yale in religious studies and philosophy. And my specialty was medieval philosophy and philosophy of religion. So if you're not familiar with the medieval philosophers, if you've ever heard of St. Thomas Aquinas or William of Ockham, you may have heard of Occam's razor. That's kind of in popular culture in many ways. My advisor was actually, many regarded her as the world's expert on William of Ockham. She unfortunately passed away a few years ago, which is interestingly how I came to philosophical business consulting. So as I said, I'm a medieval philosopher. I do a lot of work on action theory. That's sort of the idea. How do we decide to do something right or wrong? And how could we be blameworthy for it? And I was at this big conference that was in my advisor's honor a few years ago. It was a snowy, cold February in New Jersey. And I was giving my talk in this room and listening to the other talks. And that was fine. That was great. The other talks were good. The papers they gave me were good. The papers I gave them I thought my paper was great. Some of them may not have agreed, but I sat there listening and I realized that what we had worked so hard on, what the people there had worked so hard on, what I had worked so hard on, would probably not get outside of that room of just the 10 or 20 of us. And 15 or 18 of the 20 wouldn't remember what we had said 5 minutes later. And even if some of those papers, so in academia, we're supposed to write these papers. We spend a year writing a paper, picking apart some minute detail and whether it means this or that. And then if we're lucky, we get the paper published, and that's how we often get promoted in academia. But if it gets published, it's maybe read by 3 or 4 people, and the only reason they're reading it is to object to it. And while I was sitting there at my advisor was a great woman. And while I was sitting there at my advisor's conference, I realized, there's got to be a way to make a greater impact. And I know philosophy, there's this stereotype of philosophy or caricature of philosophers that just sit on a mountain and think deep thoughts and have no true practical usefulness. And, there's a lot of talk in popular press. Why does anyone need a philosophy major? I even had a doctor ask me one time, he said, Michael, why would you choose to major in philosophy? It's such a dead end route. I had no idea it was a dead end route when I went into it. So I started thinking, no, I don't necessarily think it's a dead end route, but I do hear the criticism that many of the things that philosophers do are detached from life and detached from practical life in many ways. And the way we've often in philosophical academic circles tried to counteract that is to say, well, we teach the soft skills. Oh, businesses and the world need soft skills. If you read the articles in Forbes or Wall Street Journal or whatever, where they're interviewing business leaders and they say, what do you want in your employees? And the leaders say, well, we want critical thinking. We want communication skills. We want problem solving. We want ethical behavior. We want the ability to work in groups. Typically, we've said in philosophy, well, we teach those things. That's what we teach in class. We teach how to communicate well. We teach how to think well. We teach how to avoid fallacious thinking. We teach how to think outside the box. The thing I noticed is that when we're teaching those skills, we're always teaching them in the context of, I think, therefore I am, or some sort of, ancient old philosophical idea. We're not teaching them in terms of real life and practical life, how to use it in real life. So I kind of had a revelation that February weekend. I said, I'm going to do something that has a greater impact on the world. And if I really believe philosophy teaches these skills, and if the world, and if the business world in particular is saying they want these skills, I'm going to find a way to take these skills and apply it to the real world. So for the past couple of years, that's been my goal. I've been trying to basically, in a sense, create something out of nothing. A few have tried something similar to what I'm doing, a few to great success that I know very well. But in a sense, this has never been done, to take philosophy and show how a business can actually tangibly use some of these skills, not just to think, what's the meaning of my life? And is there a God, or do we have free will, which are typical philosophy questions, which are interesting questions. But to say, hey, how can this help my employees think better? How can this help my employees make better decisions? How can this help my employees innovate some new approach to a problem that we're facing? And so that's been my goal, is to show how philosophy is not only interesting in its own right, but is actually tangibly useful in the business world. So that's my journey, and that's where I am. I'm creating something. So philosophers have an old saying, you can't really create something out of nothing. The only one who could theoretically do that was God. And I feel like that's what I've been doing the last 2 years, creating something out of nothing. And it is hard, but it's very rewarding. So
so kudos to you for taking that leap to get into this world, especially coming from, the academic world, which, you don't see it that often, at least from who I've seen in terms of, academic trying to create a business, fill a void, fill a gap, if you will. And I'm going to shout out Mike Davern of Incept Digital Marketing and John Bordage of Bordage Consulting, two of the first individuals who I've connected you into. I know Pat Whalen as well over at Trek. And I know we haven't caught up on how your chat with Pat was last week. Chat with Pat. But both John and Mike, who are incredible, they are credible sources, validated sources, experts in their own rights, have had great things to say, have interest in collaborating and welcoming you in as a strategic partner potentially, but also helping you shape the business. So there's certainly validation already. And I'd like to think I'm in that group as well, given that I have taken such an interest in working with you. And so kudos to you, though, for taking that leap and wanting to fill a gap, because I completely agree. When I first saw, this is months ago now, your LinkedIn article about some of those characteristics of what, good philosophy entails and how to apply them to your business, it was a no-brainer for me. And so it's perfect that we reconnected, and here we are. So that said, let's jump further into it. maybe some examples, Dr. Barnwell, on how you would take philosophy and apply it, in the business world, that some of the skills you mentioned, soft skills, I think that we could cover.
Sure, sure. Well, let me maybe as a way into that, let me say
Sure.
real quickly what philosophy is, because
Let's do
many
it.
people, instead of it being, I think, therefore I am, or something like that, many people may not understand what philosophy is. And that's,
Excellent.
you really have to understand what it is before you can understand how to use it. And you'll see, once we get into it, you'll see that many of the business fads that have been sort of bandied around in the world are really just philosophy warmed over. They just didn't know they were borrowing it from philosophy. So Aristotle and Socrates beat some of these business gurus by a few thousand years. There's not been a philosophical business consulting in the meantime to show that was the case and to help shortcut the circuit. So what is philosophy? I always say that philosophy, there's two parts to philosophy. And if you've ever been around a 3-year-old, or if anybody out in the audience has a 3-year-old, there's probably one particular question that the 3-year-old asks over and over, and you answer it, and they ask it again, and you answer it. John, any ideas what that one-word question is?
3-letter word, I think, right? Why?
Yeah, it's 3-letter word, right?
Yeah.
It's a good word, right? 3-letter.
Powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah. So it's why, right? Like
why? Oh, sure. Sorry, I thought I said that. I thought you heard.
Oh, no.
My bad. Okay. So it's why. I knew the answer.
So they'll say why, and you'll answer, and they'll say why, and you'll answer. And so the thing that makes us human is asking why. And really what happens is eventually your teachers or your parents just say, just be quiet and eat your Cheerios. I got to get some sleep, right? Or you got to just learn your ABCs. Just shut up and quit asking me why. And by the time we've gone to high school, we don't worry about why anymore. We just worry what's going to be on the test. What do I need to know? What do I need to know to get this job done? And that's why nobody can think outside the box. That's why nobody can think for themselves, because they quit asking why. They started asking what do I need to know? They're expecting someone else to tell them the what. And as you mentioned to start this off with, life is messy. There is no guidebook. There's no hidden answer key to life and how to figure it out. We're the only ones who can figure out what. So in order to figure out what we need to do, we need to first get back to our roots when we were 3-year-olds and ask why. Why should I do this? So part of philosophy is learning or relearning how to ask why and getting an answer to that why question. If you notice 3-year-olds, if you make up some answer that obviously makes no sense, they don't buy it. 3-year-olds are some of our smartest demographics out there. They don't buy any sort of answer that cuts the corners. And so the second part of philosophy is making sure you have a logical, rational answer. So ask why and get a logical, rational answer. This is a skill that most of us have lost because we were told to quit asking why. And philosophy is just about teaching you how to ask why and get logical, rational answers. They say that getting likes on why is Facebook and some of these different social media apps, why are they so addictive? And the idea is that, well, you get a dopamine hit every time you get a like, and everyone's after these dopamine hits. For humans, the original dopamine hit was getting an answer to why. The way you give that 3-year-old their hit of dopamine is to give them a good answer of why. That's why they keep asking it until they get the answer, because they know they haven't gotten their satisfactory response. So what philosophy does is just teach you how to ask why and how to get logical, rational answers. And we have a very precise, very complex, but very good process for getting to the logical, rational answers. And if we can teach people how to do that and how to apply that in the business world, if we can teach managers how to do that when they're managing, if we can teach employees how to do that when they're working, and leaders how to do that when they're planning new goals, and we can talk about all these aspects separately, but if we can teach them how to do that, then we'll have better businesses, we'll have better employees, we'll have more productive, efficient businesses, more ethical businesses. And really, if you think about what a business is trying to make an argument. They're offering a product or a service, and they're trying to sell that product or service. And when they're trying to sell the product or service, they're in a sense trying to make an argument as to why you should buy this product or service, right? Buy the iPhone because it'll be more convenient, or buy this refrigerator because it won't fail as often, and it'll keep your food cold, and it has the right humidity, whatever. They're making arguments. Well, the only discipline that has focused entirely on the ability to make arguments is philosophy. It's kind of amazing to me that after all this time, no one thought to go to philosophy and say, hey, we need to make good arguments. We need to convince people that this is the right product to buy. This is the right service to buy. Humans, by nature, since they're 3 years old, respond to arguments. That's our original dopamine hit, is getting a good logical answer. And I should have mentioned, right? The logical answer usually comes in the form of an argument, right? That's what philosophy is. Philosophy is, here's the good argument. Here's your starting point. Here's a point we all agree with. That'll lead to this. That'll lead to this. That'll lead to this. Buy my product, right? So really, businesses should have been availing themselves of philosophy since the beginning, because they're really trying to make arguments. And I'm just trying to fill in that gap and say, look, this is how philosophy really can't just help business, but in a sense, philosophy is essential for business. And just I believe it was Toyota. I think there was a ad about asking the 5 whys, that whenever businesses want to get back to their first principles and really figure out how to innovate, they're like, they has, I was reading some business books from, Harvard Business School professor or whatever, and they're saying, yeah, this is a great idea, right? Look at what Toyota did. They asked the 5 whys, apply the 5 whys. Well, Socrates did that from the get-go, right? Asking why is normal for a philosopher. Well, we ask sometimes more than 5 whys, or 3-year-olds have done it. So it's amazing that some of the business advice that's given now is really just philosophy warmed over. So I say, not that any of that current stuff is bad, but I say go back to the source. If we can go back to the source and properly apply the source, right? I'm not into just teaching history of philosophy. That's not going to show you how to apply it. But if we can go back to the source and learn the skills of the source, then we'll have real productive businesses. So,
couple things. A reflection first, or an observation is your passion, energy, obvious wisdom and expertise on this are I can feel it through the screen. And I'm certain that our listeners and watchers will feel the same. And that's part of why I was so intrigued with that ethics honors class. When I was back a decade ago, I could feel it, right? And energy is something that follows me around, being energy guy, energized, great energy. This is exactly, I think, it's perfect timing for me, even in my own business, to be hearing these things, because you're right. I think we are in a systematic way, as time goes on, we have to be fit into silos, right? You gotta follow the plan, whatever, go through your schooling years, middle school, high school, go to college, get a job. That's the what. But then you ask the why. And that's why I think now more than ever, with this reset we've had with COVID, there's all this labor shortage, because people are actually starting to really ponder, like, why should I work for, a wage that's going to keep me kind of near the poverty line when I have to work 70 hours a week? I don't enjoy it. I'm going to figure out other ways to monetize my skills and my time, because they're asking that why. Before, it was just the what. I need the job. I need to get some money. I need to be a functional member of society. And so I love what you just hit on, because honestly, the whole dopamine thing, I wasn't even thinking about that. So just some kudos. Go ahead.
I can just make one comment on that. That's another, in fact, if you ask some people what philosophy is about, they'll say, oh, it's about finding meaning in life. What's the point of life? Is there any meaning? In fact, that's what my intro course, kind of the subtitle of my intro course, is finding meaning in life. And as you just mentioned, with the Great Resignation going on, that's what many people are struggling with. They're struggling with how to find meaning. And again, that's in philosophy's wheelhouse, right? We've spent 2,000 years trying to explain what counts for a meaningful life, what counts for meaningful work. Much of the ethical reflections, much of the work done in ethical philosophy of ethiks, has been focused on how to find meaning, how to find self-worth, what it really takes for self-worth, what it takes for you to be happy where you are. And, usually has something to do with autonomy, some sort of freedom, some sort of free will. And so again, right, philosophy, even outside of the particular business, just with how to choose a business, whether to resign or whether not to, or how to decide to become happy in a business, that's also philosophy's realm. So,
So good. And I agree with you on just trying again. That was part of even using my life as a parallel. The last couple of years have been transformative for me because I have focused more on the why. Why am I doing this? Why am I focused here? Why am I spending time here? Why am I working with this, whoever company opportunity? But also the big why, right? The why of why am I here? What's my purpose? And how can I then take that why, that what of my purpose, and turn it into something meaningful? And again, you mentioned earlier with impact, right? So the impact that you want to have, that's where sustainability comes into the picture, right? There, you see a lot of times there's people that are getting into certain industries or focus areas because there's a way to make some money, or even just going more granular to like fitness and saying, oh, I'm going to get really fit. Say it's the early part of the year, right? New year comes along, I'm going to get fit, right? And this is my year. And then as time goes on, without having a truly galvanized, sustainable why as to why you're doing it, like if it's just to get in shape and look good for the opposite sex or whatever, it doesn't matter, like the reasoning, other than if you get to a place where it's like, I need to do this because I want to be able to, serve my community the best way. I want to be an inspiration to others. I want to be here and live a healthy, meaningful life, so that I can be here for my family one day if you're a parent or something. So once you get to like that visceral level of why, which philosophy will absolutely help you do, that's where things get really good. That's where sustainability is found. That said, why don't we cover, I don't know if you want to hit like maybe 3, 4, 5 different kind of principles of philosophy that are applicable to the business world. I'd be really excited to learn more about that.
Yeah. So, well, let's maybe this will be a good way to start. Probably many of your listeners have read Jim Collins's Good to Great,
Yes.
classic work in the field. And I was just looking over it last night, and I realized the six parts of his flywheel, almost every one of them overlaps with some part of philosophy. So he talks about the level 5 executive and what's really characteristic of the level 5 executive. And it's someone who doesn't think they know the answers. It's someone who is willing to be quiet and listen to others, doesn't think they have to rush in and make a decision. And one of the main things in philosophy is, well, the founder of Western philosophy that we recognize is Socrates. And Socrates was known for being the wisest person in the world because he said he didn't know anything, right? The Oracle of Delphi said, oh, Socrates is the wisest. He's like, how could I be the wisest? I know nothing. And in fact, if you read Socrates's dialogues, or Plato's dialogues, where Socrates was the character, and if any of the listeners have done it out there, they'll realize Socrates kind of becomes a pest because he annoys everybody and asks them questions. And you kind of start to see why they wanted to get rid of him. They may not have wanted to execute him, but Socrates went around and said, I don't know anything. Teach me this, teach me that. And every time they did it, he showed them that they didn't know what they were talking about. And the oracle said, well, you're the wisest person in the world. And he said, why? I don't know anything. And the oracle said, exactly. Right? You're the wisest person because you don't know anything. At least you know that. Most people think they know things and they don't even know that. And that's where you get big mistakes. Many mistakes come from thinking you know something when you really don't and rushing headlong into it. And Socrates was the opposite. In fact, he went out of his way to say he didn't know things. And when you're reading, say, Good to Great, that's exactly how they're defining the level 5 executive. There are a lot of things in this world we don't know. A lot of things, we can have black swan events. We can have a COVID come and hit. As you mentioned, first day in our ethics class, I said, life is great, right? Nobody should claim to know everything. So this quality, I always joke that the reason you never see philosophers on cable news talk shows is that a real philosopher knows they don't know anything, and all the pundits on cable news talk shows have to talk as if they know everything and they understand all the details of all these complex issues and have an opinion. And philosophers have strong opinions, don't get me wrong on that, but they know they don't know anything, and the good philosopher keeps in the back of their mind, yeah, there's a lot I don't know. I'm just a pea brain, right? We just have a 3-pound brain up here that, even lets us down all the time. Even when you were in high school math and doing a problem set, and you knew for sure you had the logical steps down in that math set, and you still missed it, right? So our brains are very weak. So why we would think we could understand the way the world is going to work or the way some product is going to sell with certainty, well, we can't. And so the level 5 executive that that Jim Collins talked about is someone who realizes that, right? That they realize they don't have all the answers and that life is gray. So, and then I was going through, right, the next part was make sure you have the right people. Right? And well, how do you make sure you have the right people? They've got to have the right ethics. They've got to have, well, they got to have the right ability to think, but they've got to have the right characters. If anyone knows anything about philosophy, they probably think of philosophy and ethics and business ethics and how you can take ethics and apply it to philosophy. And usually that's cashed out in a list of do's and don'ts, but ethics is really much more deep than that. Ethics is about changing or paying attention to your habits, paying attention to what kind of person you are, paying attention to what you would naturally feel in certain situations and make sure you have the proper feelings. And so philosophy is all about making sure you are the right person or making sure you can identify the right people. And then the next part is the disciplined thought. So he has a whole section on making sure you have disciplined thought. So you have the right people, then you have the right thought. And one thing he doesn't talk about in the book, or at least that I remember or could identify, it's one thing to have a right thought of getting your hedgehog concept. That's one thing that's focused on. But you want to make sure you avoid mistakes. You want to make sure that you're not subjecting yourself to optimistic thinking, unrealistic thinking. You want to make sure that you're thinking outside the box. And the only way to do that is to use these tools that philosophy has. So one instance, we'll often make weak analogies. We'll think that, oh, last time I know one person who worked in a business where they outsourced a particular process. And when they outsourced it, it went great. They saved a lot of money. The product they outsourced still worked perfectly. And so fast forward a year or two, a similar situation, similar product that can be outsourced. It worked so great the last time. They decided to outsource it this time. And it was a miserable failure. They lost money on it. They had to bring it back stateside, I believe, in order to finish the product. And when they looked at it afterwards, they realized it was a complete weak analogy. In fact, it was something very obvious. The first time they had an insider, somebody who had worked here for the company and now lived in the outsourced place, knew both languages, could do the translation, could make sure all the cultural differences were taken account of. In this second one, they didn't have that. So that's a huge disanalogy. You would think it'd be human nature to realize that disanalogy, but it's not. We make fallacious inferences based upon prior experiences all the time. And unless you're trained in philosophy, you're not really going to go through and say, well, wait a second, no two times are alike. And the most we can do is hope that the most factors, we call this inductive reasoning in philosophy, but the most we can do is say, well, this happened and this happened, and then this happened and then this happened, and we want this to happen again. We want to outsource again. And we want this to happen again because it was a good result, but you got to make sure this third one looks like the previous two. And if there's any disanalogies, right, it can't just be, it's an outsourcing this product. It can't just be it's outsourcing this particular product to this particular company. There's a lot more factors that are involved that unless you're really thinking about paying attention to weak analogies, you would miss. So thought processes, paying attention to the way our minds are wired to think fallaciously, right? So our minds, even though we're human beings, even though we're rational beings, we weren't evolved to think logically. We were evolved to reproduce and survive and to solve problems, right? That was right. We had to solve problems to stay alive until we could reproduce. And so,
in the words of Naval Ravikant, sorry to interrupt, but in the words of Naval Ravikant, we are reproduction and survival machines, right?
Right.
So true. So true. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's so. And in fact, this is hard for many philosophers to accept. Many philosophers, in fact, the traditional definition of a human being from medieval times was a rational animal. And so it's like, well, reason is our defining characteristic. Well, it may be what makes us different from some other animals in the animal kingdom, but I don't know if it's our defining characteristic, right? When many of us act without reason a lot of times, even though we think we are. So having that epistemic humility, or epistemic humility means, you don't know something, right? It's fancy.
Oh, good. I love it. It's educational, please.
Yeah. So Socrates, when I was talking about how he knows he doesn't know, that's called epistemic humility. So having that epistemic humility, being humble about what you know, that's kind of core about what philosophy really is. So Anyway, I may have lost my train of thought there. But so there is an example of how philosophy can help. And just another one to throw out there, thinking outside the box. So this is thrown up all the time, right? Real companies innovate, they think outside the box. Again, if you're just asking what, never asking why, you never even think out, you never even realize you're in a box. So philosophy teaches one of our main fallacies is thought's dilemma. All right, so I always make a joke when I teach my students. I say, well, look, I've got this argument. Winona Ryder either hates me or loves me. And I know for sure she doesn't hate me. So then I'm like, see, she loves me. I should move to Hollywood and be with Winona Ryder. And they're always smart enough to point out, well, you gave me the wrong options. It's not love or hate. Maybe she doesn't know you or just likes me as a friend. And so I'm like, yeah, so but notice, if you just start with that starting point, if you just start with the box, love me or hate me, you can end up, all right, this was a simple example, but you can end up convincing somebody of something that you really wouldn't have convinced them of otherwise because you falsely defined the box. We're living in boxes all the time. So once you have been trained in philosophical business consulting, philosophical business thinking, you're trained to realize what boxes you're in. You're trained to realize these, what we call false dilemmas or false dichotomies, and that's where you start to think outside the box. And that's where you do innovative thinking. And one way to do this is going back to the companies. And remember, every company is an argument answering some why question, right? So what'd be a good example? I think I just had one on the top of my head the other day. Let's say, let's say cookbooks, right? Let's say restaurants. Why do restaurants exist, right? Well, to feed people. Okay. So what are the alternatives? Restaurants or no restaurants? Well, on the one side, you have restaurants that feeds people. So if you didn't have restaurants, people wouldn't be fed out. They could still eat. But then what are restaurants adding that you can't do at home? Well, you can eat a good meal. You can cook in a way. And, I'm fortunate to live in Lewiston, New York, where we have some great chefs around. And even in Niagara Falls, beside Trek, probably had my greatest meal ever at Facets the other day.
Chef Bobby Anderson, let's go.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, so what would I be missing? Well, if there weren't restaurants and I'd just have to cook my own food and I wouldn't do as well. And so, well, what's the alternative? It's either restaurant or not restaurant. Well, those aren't the only restaurants. And then, well, there's recipes. And then, now recipes, well, then you got to go out and buy the ingredients. And then it's not necessarily Bobby Flay's recipe or who's ever recipe. And then I thought, hey, here's what would happen if we didn't have any of those options. Well, maybe they could bring the restaurant to us. Maybe they could come up with their own ingredient list, go to the store, put those ingredient lists, buy each of the ingredients of what they would use in the restaurant. So, and then you could go out and not just follow a recipe, but follow their actual ingredients, come home and cook it. So just doing exercises such as that to start training ourselves to think outside the box. Why does your business exist? What would be the case if your business didn't exist? And then if the business didn't exist, what's that worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario with your business existing? And then what, if it didn't exist, what would be the alternative? What would people figure out otherwise? They would figure something out. Always something new is always figured out. If libraries didn't exist and if books didn't exist, how would you get your reading? Well, I guess you just wouldn't read. And then Amazon figured out, no, you'd have a Kindle, right? We could, who would have ever thought they could zoom books to a Kindle electronically 30 years ago and you wouldn't have to have a physical book. So there's all sorts of ideas out there that can be thought of once we start to ask these right questions of why, right? Why does the business exist? What would be the case if the business didn't exist? And I don't know, maybe a pause there, John, or do you want me to keep going?
No, this is all fascinating. I'm certain that there's a lot of gold here for folks to key in on and to think about in their own lives. My curiosity, I've got two things and then we're going to wrap up. And again, thanks for shedding this light. And again, the passion, the energy, man. I got my Vincent Van Gogh shirt on. There's a quote, I'll probably screw it up, but it's basically, I'd rather die from passion than die of a life of boredom. Right. And something like that, I'm probably screwing it up. It used to be top of mind, but for some reason it escapes me. But similar to that, it's obvious that you're passionate about this, and I am too. My curiosity would be, is you've got you've got business owners, executives, managers, supervisors listening to this. What is one thing they can do starting now, whether it's now or tomorrow or whatever, soon, that they can do to apply in their life, in their role, to kind of optimize performance using philosophy?
Oh, good. So great question. This brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about anyway. So this is perfect.
Sure.
I mentioned earlier that the way we get to the right answers or logical answers in philosophy, you have a long process. We call that process dialectic. And really, it's something that you are familiar with. It's what they do in courtrooms. They have an argument, they have an objection, they have a reply, they have an objection, they have a reply. Now, this may seem obvious, but it's not really as obvious or as second nature to us as it seems. Whenever, in order to make sure you've really proven your point, or you really have a right sort of road ahead of you, you've planned the right path. Usually what we do is, well, I know this is the right path. I'll just make sure it's the right path. Oh yeah, sure, it's the right path. Okay, let's go for it, right? And you don't really consider the possible problems that could arise. That's why businesses face unforeseen consequences all the time. So one thing that's easy to start doing, and again, the more you're trained at it, the better you are, is to start engaging in this dialectic where you bring up an objection, the strongest objection, right? You only convince somebody if you consider their strongest objection. So say you think that our business's right next step is to expand into Western Pennsylvania. All right. So, and hey, you've got a lot of good ideas, right? There's a larger population base in Erie. We think they would like my product. It's easy to transport from where we are in Niagara Falls, New York. So it seems like you got a lot of good reasons. So we're just going to expand. Well, what about gas? Yeah, but gas won't be a problem, right? So you could see how some businesses may do that. The first thing you could start to do, and you can start today, is to stop and say, find the 4 biggest problems with going into Erie. If you were an evil genius, if you were an evil demon and you wanted to go out of your way to ruin this plan to expand into Erie, what would you do?
Oh, I love this.
Find those 4 evil demon ways that would destroy the plan to expand into Erie. And then think if you can respond to those, right? Think how you would respond to each of those possible ways. And that'll start you on the process of dialectic for any decision. And in fact, we didn't talk about it today, but philosophy has a great history of how to make decisions. And I have a whole separate framework for how to make decisions according to philosophy. But this is part of it. Part of it is
enter prop, decide. Right on, baby. Philosophy for business. Oh, you can kind of see it. But sorry, let's finish that thought, because this is I'm certain that there are going to be so many folks that resonate with this and can apply this immediately.
And this actually helps against groupthink. I mentioned in my first LinkedIn article that philosophy can help against groupthink. And we're all humans. We want to get along. We don't want to be that person in the meeting that makes the meeting go longer, or that everyone's always rolling their eyes at. But in order to really make a decision and know it's the logical, rational, right answer, you have to go through this dialectic, and you have to bring up strong objections. You have to consider them. You have to see if you can reply to those and still defend your plan against that objection. Then you have to let them object again. And this goes back and forth, just like in a courtroom. That's why we're all familiar with, right? I object. No, they're guilty. No, I object. So you have to learn how to do this. And I lost again. So anyway,
as a business owner, right? And strategic decisions, forward planning, right? Business decisions. I think it's brilliant. So the summary is, for our millions of watchers and listeners, I do that in every show. Law of attraction. I'm going to do it every time till it's true. But evil genius, I love that. That's like, that could maybe work its way into the title of this, because it's true. Think about it, right? So instead of saying because there's emotion, right? There's emotion that's within a decision. So you're going to want to find the reasons to buy that, even just on a low level, buy that next pair of running shoes, right? Well, let's really find the objections and then weigh that against why you want to buy them. And I'm sure odds are your shoes only have a couple 100 miles on them. They have another 200 on them. Don't buy it. Wait, use these shoes, and then get them. So,
and I would say,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, real quick, John. So this is an antidote against groupthink. If you really have this process institutionalized, groupthink would be unacceptable, because if people haven't raised objections and if you haven't gone through this dialectic process, you're in a groupthink. So that was what I was.
No, it's perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, because that's insightful and impactful, immediately actionable. Last but not least, how can we connect with you? I know, yeah, LinkedIn, email, whatever best way. Obviously, this is going to be a great tool that we'll use and you'll use as getting philosophical business consulting of, business thinking out there. But where else can we connect? And then we're going to wrap up. And I'm certain there will be more to do and cover in the coming, iterations of another episode or two. So, but where can we connect?
Great. So you can just find me on LinkedIn. I'm just under my name, Michael Barnwell, and that's Michael with an AEL. And if you want to email me, you can email me at Michael Barnwell. So MichaelBarnwell. So my full name at philosophy 4, the number 4, and then business. So,
and I'll put that in the show notes, Doc. That'll all be there. I should have led with that, but all that will be in the show notes. And again, there's so much greatness still to be manifested here. I really enjoyed, for me, just outwardly reflecting the dopamine thing about when we were not as evolved. That was where our dopamine came from, was to get the right answer. And honestly, I couldn't think of a more noble and logical reason to, receive dopamine, right? Those good chemicals in our brain, because we found the answer, right? We were on a quest to find the answer. And then also the evil genius thing. I'm going to apply that in my own life. And it's not just business, right, Doc? You could do that. I use it with the shoe, right? You want to buy shoes, but then, okay, well, what's the biggest, strongest objection? And then try to beat that objection. And then when you can't, you don't do it.
Right.
And you save yourself $200. Merry Christmas.
And I can't take full credit for that. Descartes had the idea first about an evil genius or evil demon.
Good. But all these years later, you're here to be that, the advocate for that, the individual that's shedding the light on it, so that we can employ that in our own life as it stands today. So this is really cool. Little did I think, Dr. Barnwell, that, I'd have you as a sophomore at Niagara, and here we are now over a decade later collaborating on this. And again, there's so much to do, all in the mindsets of serving others, creating impact, and filling gaps, right? That's where the greats find their strides. You find real problems and you come up with solutions to solve them. And in my opinion, I'm confident that you are, you're there, and you'll continue to evolve it. Maybe the name will change. I know we've talked about a couple name potential changes as you evolve this, but excited to watch you grow and be a part of this, and see a lot of businesses and a lot of people make better decisions and just live more wholesome lives.
Great. Thanks for having me, John. It's an honor to get to work with you too after all these years. So thanks for doing all you've done for our community and for me in particular. So
I appreciate that, Doc. Well, and so all this gratitude exchanging here, gratitude again to vidwheel Creator Network, as I end every show, for the support. I wouldn't be able to do these things with the video and the audio podcast without vidwheel, based here in Buffalo, New York. Reach out to me if interested in learning more about what vidwheel can do for you as a consultant, as a business owner, as someone who wants to, bulk up their video marketing, social media presence. Hit me up, or you can hit up vidwheel, and that's always in the show notes. So thanks again, Doc. Until next time, this was a lot of fun, and thanks for dropping all that thought leadership gold on us.
Thanks for having me.
Talk soon.